In 80 years, the Mongols conquered an area larger than the modern United States, Canada, and Mexico combined. They did it with an army that never stopped moving, never slept in barracks, and never ate a cooked meal on campaign. The average Mongol warrior in 1241 consumed more protein per day than an NFL linebacker eats today, weighed around 140 pounds or 64 kilograms, and could stay in the saddle for 72 hours without dismounting. His enemies collapsed inside of 18 hours. The difference was not better horses. It was not better weapons. It was the food. Today I'm going to show you every one of them, and by the end of this video, you will understand why the most feared warriors in history ate a diet that modern nutrition science has only recently caught up to. Number 1. Borts, the pocket food that fed an empire. Walk into a 13th century Mongol camp in November, and you would see strips of raw beef hanging from the wooden frame of a yurt, cut long and thin. There was no salt used, no smoke, no fire. The cold wind and shade did all the work. In a month, a single cow, dried this way, reduced to less than a tenth of its original weight. That dried meat is called Borts, and it is the reason the Mongol army did not need a supply train. The system was brutally efficient. Warriors would take the Borts, pound it with a stone, and grind it into a coarse powder. That powder went into a small linen bag and tied to the saddle. One warrior could carry enough ground Borts in a single pouch to feed himself for weeks. When he needed a meal, he pulled out a handful, dropped it into hot water in a leather pouch, and within minutes it rehydrated into a thick, protein-dense stew that required no cookware and no fire to prepare. And there is one detail about Borts that most history books leave out entirely. The Mongols had a trick for drying meat even faster on the move. They placed the strips under the saddle of a horse. The constant pressure squeezed out moisture. The heat of the horse accelerated the drying. The animal's sweat added a light salt cure. By the end of a day's ride, the strips were already half cured. By the end of a week, they were shelf-stable for a year. A freeze-dried beef survival pouch today, the kind marketed to preppers, costs around $18 per pound and contains preservatives, anti-caking agents, and added sodium. Borts contains one ingredient, meat. For your kitchen, the method is simple. Cut lean beef into thin strips, hang them in a cool, dry place with airflow, and wait 3 to 4 weeks. You now have a shelf-stable protein source that lasts a year and weighs a fraction of what you started with. Number 2. Aaruul, the rock-hard snack that replaced every multivitamin. Aaruul is dried curd, hard, crumbly, sometimes flavorful, sometimes sour, always white. The Mongols made it by boiling yogurt until it separated, pressing the curd under stones to remove the whey, then drying it on the roof of the yurt for weeks until it hardened into pieces that looked like small chalky bricks. A Mongol warrior carried Aaruul in his pocket the way a modern soldier carries a protein bar. Except Aaruul does not go rancid. It does not need refrigeration. A properly dried piece of Aaruul stored in a dry place lasts, according to Mongolian food scientists studied at the Swedish University of Agricultural Sciences in 2015, well over a year. Some nomadic families still keep Aaruul from 3 years prior. It is a source of calcium, complete protein, and, this is the part most people miss, vitamins A, D, E, and B12. The exact vitamins a meat-heavy diet tends to need support with. The drying process concentrates them. One small piece the size of a sugar cube delivers what a multivitamin claims to, only it was made by a shepherd with a pot, a cloth, and the sun. Compare that to a modern protein bar. A Quest bar costs about $2.50 and contains 22 ingredients, including sucralose, soy protein, isolate, and added stabilizers. A single piece of Aaruul costs about 10 cents to make from 1 cup of yogurt. The Mongols did not invent Aaruul to be healthy. They invented it to stop meat spoilage and carry nutrition on horseback. The nutrient density was a side effect of the technique. For your kitchen, you can make a basic version at home. Take a quart of plain whole milk yogurt, strain it through cheesecloth overnight until it is very thick, press it between 2 plates with weight on top for a day, cut it into small pieces, and dry them at a low temperature in an oven with the door cracked or in a food dehydrator. Store them in a sealed jar. Number 3. Airag. Here is something that will surprise modern nutritionists. The Mongol warrior's primary beverage was not water. It was fermented mare's milk. Airag, sometimes called kumis, is mare's milk that has been churned in a leather bag for hours and allowed to ferment with wild lactobacilli and yeast. The result is a slightly sour, mildly fizzy, mildly alcoholic drink, about 1 to 3% alcohol, packed with live bacteria. A 2024 review published in the journal Foods confirmed that fermented mare's milk contains Lactobacillus delbrueckii and Lactobacillus rhamnosus, strains that convert 80 to 90% of the milk sugar into lactic acid. This is why Airag is tolerable for people who cannot digest regular milk. It also means the Mongol warrior was drinking, by modern definition, one of the most probiotic-rich foods on the planet every single day. Mare's milk contains about 40% more lactose than cow's milk, which makes it perfect for fermentation. Those lactic acid bacteria acidify the gut, suppress pathogens, and, according to research published in PMC in 2020, support the immune system in ways that processed dairy cannot. William of Rubruck, the Franciscan friar sent to the Mongol court in 1253, wrote specifically about Airag in his journal. He described it as pungent on the tongue like wine, and noted that after drinking it, one feels rather more drunk than from beer. He also noted something modern researchers now confirm. Soldiers who drank Airag daily were noticeably less prone to sickness than soldiers who did not. Compare that to a modern sports drink. Gatorade costs around $2 a bottle and contains high fructose corn syrup, artificial colours, and 0 probiotics. Airag contains live bacteria, pre-digested protein, and micronutrients. For your kitchen, making real Airag is impractical unless you have access to a mare, but you can approximate the principle. Raw kefir made with live cultures, fermented for 24 hours at room temperature, delivers a similar probiotic profile. Number 4. Boodog, the victory feast with no pot and no oven. When a Mongol army won a major battle, Genghis Khan did not send for cooking equipment, he sent for a goat. Boodog is the single most famous hot meal in traditional Mongolian cuisine, and it is cooked using no pot, no pan, and no oven. The method will seem impossible until you hear it described. A goat, or historically a marmot, is butchered through a single small slit at the neck. The bones and organs are pulled out through that opening, but the skin is kept entirely intact. What you are left with is essentially a leather bag in the shape of an animal. The Mongols then heated fist-sized river stones in a fire until they glowed orange and dropped them directly into the carcass alongside chunks of the meat, salt, and wild onions. The neck was tied shut with wire or sinew. The outside was singed clean of hair over embers. For the next hour, the animal cooked itself from the inside out. The stones radiated heat. The skin trapped the steam. The fat rendered. According to the president of the Mongolian Cooks Association, Genghis Khan threw Boodog banquets for his warriors after every major victory. This was celebration food, designed to feed 100 men from one animal with no kitchen and no cookware. And the real reason behind the technique has almost nothing to do with flavour. The Mongols invented this method because they could not afford to carry pots on horseback. A clay pot cracks when it hits rocks. A bronze pot weighs 15 pounds. So they turned the animal itself into the pot. The carcass was the vessel. The stones were the burners. The earth was the kitchen. For your kitchen, the lesson is not to butcher a goat. The lesson is that the best cooking equipment you own is heat and pressure in a sealed container. A Dutch oven, a clay tagine, a cast iron pot with a tight lid. All use the same principle the Mongols used 800 years ago. Seal the food, let it cook in its own steam, and walk away. Number 5. Horse blood, the emergency ration nobody writes about. This one sounds shocking, and that is the point. When a Mongol warrior was on a forced march with no access to food, sometimes for 3 or 4 days straight, he did not starve. He opened a small vein in the neck of his horse, filled a cup, pressed the wound closed, and rode on. The horse, a full-grown Mongolian horse weighing around 650 pounds, 295 kilograms, could safely give up about a pint of blood with 0 long-term consequence. That pint contains roughly 30 grams of protein, over 400 calories of fat and protein, and a full dose of iron, B12, and electrolytes. Marco Polo, writing in the late 13th century about his time with Kublai Khan, recorded this practice directly in his travelogue. He noted that Mongol riders could ride for 10 days without stopping to eat or cook, because every soldier was riding on top of his own emergency food supply. The horse was not just transport, the horse was a mobile pantry. Obviously, nobody should try this at home. But the principle matters, because it reveals something about how the Mongols thought about nutrition. Food was not something you ate on a schedule. Food was something you had access to when you needed it, built into the system around you. Modern nutrition has rediscovered this concept under the name metabolic flexibility. It is the ability to function on stored fat, on protein, on ketones, or on glucose, depending on what is available. A 2024 scoping review in the journal Nutrients found that this kind of metabolic flexibility is strongly associated with endurance capacity, stable blood sugar, and reduced inflammation. The Mongol warrior had the most metabolically flexible diet in military history by accident. His emergency ration was walking underneath him. Number 6. Bantan, the recovery soup that put a warrior back in the saddle. After a hard ride, or after too much Airag the night before, a Mongol warrior did not eat Borts or Aaruul. He ate Bantan. Bantan is a thick flour and meat soup, and it is the oldest recovery food in the Mongolian kitchen. The method is brutally simple. You start with a bone broth, usually mutton or beef bones simmered for hours until the marrow breaks down into the water. That broth alone is already packed with collagen, gelatin, and fat. Then the cook grabs a handful of flour, adds 2 or 3 spoonfuls of the hot broth to it, and rubs the mixture between their palms until it forms tiny pebble-sized lumps. Those lumps get dropped back into the boiling broth. 5 minutes later, you have a soup that is somewhere between a porridge and a stew, with chewy bits of dough suspended in a rich, fatty liquid. A bowl of Bantan is pure calorie and protein delivery. It hydrates, it warms the core, and it delivers bone marrow, collagen, animal fat, and fast-digesting carbohydrates all in one hot cup. And the strangest thing about Bantan is how little it has changed in 800 years. Bantan is still considered the Mongolian equivalent of chicken noodle soup. It is what mothers make their children when they are sick, what shepherds drink after a cold day in the saddle, and what herders serve at dawn before a long ride. It has been called Mongolia's ancient hangover cure, and anyone who has tried to drink Airag by the gallon understands why. Modern sports science has only recently rediscovered what Bantan was doing 800 years ago. A 2020 review in the journal Nutrients confirmed that post-exertion recovery is accelerated by the combination of bone broth collagen, animal fat, and moderate carbohydrates within 30 minutes of exertion. That is exactly what a bowl of Bantan delivers. For your kitchen, Bantan is the easiest recovery food you can make. Simmer beef or lamb bones in water for 3 to 4 hours. Salt to taste. Rub a handful of whole wheat flour between your hands over the pot, letting small lumps fall in. Stir, simmer 5 minutes, and eat. Number 7. Tarag. The mother culture every other food came from. This last one is not just a food, it is the source that made every other food on this list possible. Tarag is Mongolian yogurt, not the watery sweetened kind in plastic cups. The real thing, thick, tangy, alive with billions of bacteria, and made every single day in every jar across the steppe for at least 800 years. The process is almost embarrassingly simple. A nomadic family would boil fresh milk from a cow, yak, sheep, or camel, cool it to roughly body temperature, around 95 degrees Fahrenheit, 35 degrees Celsius, then stir in a spoonful of the previous day's Tarag as a starter. Within hours, the milk transformed into yogurt. That yogurt became the base of everything. Strained and pressed, it became Aaruul. Churned and fermented further, it became Airag. Thinned with water, it became the daily drink. Tarag was the mother culture. And what modern dairy science has found hiding inside it would stop most food scientists in their tracks. A 2014 study published in the Journal of Dairy Science identified that traditional Mongolian Tarag contains at least 5 distinct strains of lactic acid bacteria, including Lactobacillus helveticus, Lactobacillus fermentum, and Lactobacillus paracasei. Commercial American yogurt typically contains 2. That bacterial diversity is why nomadic children raised on Tarag from infancy developed digestive systems capable of handling the enormous quantities of dairy a Mongol warrior would later consume. Tarag built the gut that could drink fermented mare's milk by the gallon. Every family's Tarag was slightly different. Every family's starter was a living heirloom passed from grandmother to granddaughter. A popular Mongolian saying held that you could judge a bride's worth by the taste of her Tarag. For your kitchen, this is the easiest item on the list to reproduce. Buy a container of plain whole milk yogurt that lists live active cultures on the label. Heat a quart of milk to just below boiling, then let it cool to around 110 degrees Fahrenheit, 43 degrees Celsius. Stir in 2 tablespoons of the yogurt as your starter. Cover, wrap in a towel, and leave it in a warm place overnight. Save 2 tablespoons from that batch, and you never need to buy a starter again. The Mongols did not have laboratories. They did not have journals. What they had was 800 years of trial and error on horseback, a climate that killed anything weak, and a ruthless selection pressure that forced them to discover what actually worked. The diet that built the largest contiguous land empire in human history was not a collection of tricks. It was the result of the longest nutritional field experiment ever run, and the data is still standing. Nomadic Mongolian families today, on this same diet, have some of the lowest rates of type 2 diabetes and cardiovascular disease in Asia. They did not conquer half the world by accident. They did it on food you can make in your kitchen this week. If you found this valuable, hit subscribe. Every week we dig up something the last generation forgot. Drop a comment and tell me which of these 7 foods you are going to try first. The Borts? The Aaruul? The Bantan? The Tarag? I read every one.